Good day, students, and welcome to our next lesson. So, in this lesson, we are going to talk about the liquid-liquid phase diagram. So, as you can recall, I think when we started with this phase diagram, we spoke about the one-component system. And for one-component system, I think we make an example about water. We also make an example about carbon dioxide. And subsequently to that, I think we also drawn some phase diagram for water as well as for carbon dioxide. So when we're drawing the phase diagram for one component system like water and carbon dioxide, I think in our graph we have shown some different region within our graph. Because in our graph, I think there was a region for the solid phase, there was also a region for the gaseous phase, there was also a region for the liquid phase. And within our graph, I think even the triple point was also shown from the diagram. And we said that the triple point is a point in which the liquid phase, the gaseous phase, as well as the liquid phase, they are at equilibrium. And during the past two or the past three lessons, we've been talking about the two-component system. So when we are having the two-component system, it means that we do have two components. During the last class, I think we talked about some phase diagram whereby we're having the vapor and we're also having the liquid. It was the liquid vapor phase diagram. So the main difference about what we are going to do today, as well as what we did during the previous lesson, is that in this case we're going to talk about liquid. We're not going to talk about the liquid vapor phase diagram. So when we talk about the liquids or two liquids, one can have different types of the liquids when we are mixing them. Some of the liquids, when we mix liquid A and liquid B, they can be miscible. However, some of the liquids, like when you are mixing them, they can be immiscible. So there are some definitions that I think they are so important. Okay, the first type of definitions that we must acclimatize ourselves with, it is what we call azeotropes. So when we talk about an azeotropes, we are basically talking about a mixture of two or more miscible liquids that when boiled together, they produce the same composition in the vapor phase as that is present in the original mixture. So in other words, so these two liquids, so when we are mixing them together, it is impossible for us to differentiate between liquid A as well as liquid B. So even when we are boiling them together, it means that they're also going to boil at the very same temperature and as well as the same composition. Okay, for the azeotropes, mixing of two different liquids. Remember that these liquids, they do have the different boiling points and they are also different in terms of their volatility. Meaning that we can have different types of the azeotropes. Before talking about the different types of the azeotropes, it is important to know that many liquids, they have temperature composition phase diagram resembling the ideal versions. However, a number of important liquids, they also deviate from ideality. So in other words, if a maximum occurs in the phase diagram, favorable interactions between liquid A and liquid B molecules will stabilize the liquids. So in the next slide, I'll show what I mean by this particular statement. So if a minimum occurs in the phase diagram, also unfavorable interactions between A and B molecules, they also destabilize the liquids. So in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say is that we can have two different types of the azeotropes. So, and one type is whereby we're having the maximum point or the maximum it is occurring. So the other type of the azeotrope is whereby we can see that a minimum is occurring. Okay, the first type of an azeotrope phase diagram, it is what we call a high boiling azeotrope. So according to this phase diagram for this particular diagram, so when the liquid composition of A is distilled, the composition of the remaining liquid, it changes toward B, but not further. So why are we saying that? So when you consider a liquid composition of A on the right of the maximum in our figure, the vapor at A prime 2 of the boiling mixture at A2 is richer in A. So if that vapor is removed or is condensed somewhere, it means that the remaining liquid will move to a composition that is richer in capital B, such as that is represented by A3. And the vapor in the equilibrium with this mixture will have composition at A prime 3. So as that vapor is removed, the composition of the boiling liquids will shift toward a point such as A4, and the composition of the vapor shift to A4 prime. Hence, as evaporation proceeds, the composition of the remaining liquid will shift towards B as A is drawn off. The boiling point of the liquid will rise and the vapor will become richer in B. So when so much A has been evaporated that the liquid has reached the composition at point B, the vapor will have the same composition as the liquid. So in other words, evaporation then occurs without a change in composition. So in the next diagram, so this diagram is showing a low boiling azeotrope. So for a low boiling azeotrope, so when a mixture at A is fractionally distilled, the vapor in equilibrium in the fractionating columns, it will move towards B and then remains unchanged. So as you can see in our diagram, so suppose in our diagram, we start with a mixture of composition A1. I think we can all see where A1 is, and follow the change in the composition of the vapor that rises through a fractionating column. So our mixture is going to boil at point A2. I think we can see where A2 is to give vapor of composition A2 prime. So this vapor, it condenses in the column to a liquid of the same composition. Now it is marked as A3. So that liquid, it reaches equilibrium with its vapor at A prime 3, which condenses the higher up to the tube to give a liquid of the same composition, which we are now going to call it A4. The fractionation, therefore, it shifts the vapor towards the azeotropic composition at B, but not beyond. And the azeotropic vapor emerges from top of the column. So typical example whereby we're having a low boiling azeotrope, so they include a mixture of ethanol as well as water. So this mixture, it normally boils unchanged when the content is 4% by mass and the temperature is around 78 degrees Celsius. Remember that I said that we can have two types of the liquids. The one liquid is whereby we're having the miscible liquids. For the miscible liquids, I've said that typical examples is whereby we're having the azeotropes. And for the azeotropes, we can have two types of the azeotropes, whereby we're having the maximum and also where we are having the minimum. Okay, for the immiscible liquids, so let's consider the distillation of two immiscible liquids. So examples for two immiscible liquids, so they include octane and water. So when you mix octane and water, we all know that they're not going to mix. I think the commonly used example of the miscible liquid is that like when we are mixing water with paraffin, we know that they're not going to mix. So this system, it can be considered as the joint distillation of the separate components. So in other words, the total vapor pressure in this particular system P, it will be PA star plus PB star. So this type of the liquids, the immiscible liquids. So they normally boils when the pressure is equals to 1 atm. And so the mixture boils at a lower temperature than either component would allow. So in summary, for the immiscible liquids, so it is possible that when we are having the immiscible liquids, we can also distill our liquids. And the other thing that is important is that, so even when we are having the immiscible liquids, it is also possible that we can boil that particular mixture of liquids. But the most important thing is that, so this particular mixture will only boil when the pressure is equals to 1 atm, and it typically boils at lower temperature than either component would allow. So this particular slide, it's also trying to illustrate what I've said in the previous slide. The distillation of A, as you can see that we are having A and we also have P. Of A, which is two immiscible liquids that can be regarded as B. The joint distillation of the separated components and the boiling occurs when the sum of the partial pressure equals to the external pressure. So in this particular instance, it means instead of just having a distillation, we're going to have a joint distillation, whereby it will be possible for us to be able to separate this particular liquids. Okay, moving forward about this liquid phase diagram. So let's consider the temperature composition diagrams for the system that consists of partially miscible liquids. So when you talk about the partially miscible liquids, we are basically talking about the liquids that do not mix at all proportions at all temperature. So they don't mix at all. Okay, suppose we have a small amount of liquid B. So this small amount of liquid B, it is added to another liquid A at temperature T prime. So if it dissolves completely, the binary mixture, of course, is going to be a single phase. But if it does not dissolve completely, obviously we are going to have two phases. As more of component B is added, or as more of liquid B is added, it means that A becomes more saturated in B and no more B will dissolve. So as a consequence, we are going to have two phases. So in other words, the most abundant phase is A, that is saturated with B. So minor phase is B, that is also saturated with A. So this is a typical temperature composition phase diagram. So in case whereby we are having partially miscible liquids. So as you can see from this particular diagram, I think this particular diagram is completely different from the diagrams that we are used to. The temperature composition diagram for hexane and nitrobenzene at 1 atm. Remember that we have said that if you are having the immiscible liquids, for those immiscible liquids, for them to boil, they normally boil at around when the pressure it is equals to 1 atm. So in our diagram, I think we can see that we have our diagram. In our diagram, like when you look at around the temperature, I think on top there we also have the upper critical temperature, which is the temperature above which the liquids are immiscible in all proportions. And we also have below temperature. So when we look at this particular diagram, one can say that the region below the upper critical temperature, it corresponds to the composition and the temperature at which the liquids are partially miscible. So below that particular graph, as you can see that even P is equals to 2, but the region above the upper critical temperature is the temperature above which the liquids are miscible in all proportions. Okay, the last thing that I want to talk about is what we call the phase separation. The relative abundance of each phase is normally given by the Lever rule. I think, ladies and gentlemen, if you can go through your textbook, you can read more about what the lever rule is. So the most important thing is that as the amount of B increases, the composition of each phase will stay the same, but the amount of each will change with the lever rule. Make sure that you do acclimatize, or you do read what the lever rule is and what the lever rule is all about. Eventually, a point is reached where so much B is present that it can dissolve all the A, and the system it reverts to a single phase. So even as we can see from the previous slide, as long as you are increasing the temperature, you can see in that particular point the upper critical temperature. In that point, it means that we only have one phase. So in that point, it means that both liquid A and liquid B, so in this case, both the hexane as well as the nitrobenzene, they can be able to mix. So with this particular slide, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you for listening to this video and also watching this video. Thank you.